Okay, so what you guys see here are a bunch of different puzzle pieces, okay? And on these puzzle pieces, we have a chemical symbol that represents an element on our periodic table, and we have the number of valence electrons that element has. And something else that you might notice is that they're shaped like puzzle pieces. So what we're going to do is we're going to match these puzzle pieces together using what we know about valence electrons to create chemical compounds. So I'll go ahead and start with calcium since it's right here. Now calcium has 2 valence electrons, okay? Each one of these has 2 valence electrons. So I have 1 atom of calcium, 2 atoms of calcium, okay? So I have 2 atoms of calcium. This is an element. I have 1 element, which is calcium. But I have 2 pieces of calcium, okay? 1 element, but I have 2 of them, okay? And now I have 2 valence electrons. Should I try and bond oxygen, or should I try and bond chlorine? So if I have 2, remember guys, making 8 is the goal for each atom. Making 8 is the goal for each atom. So I'm going to use oxygen, okay? So calcium and oxygen share 2 and 6 electrons. So that makes 8. So now I have 2 elements, calcium and oxygen. Okay, and then this is 1 molecule. So you guys start paying attention to some of the vocabulary I'm using. All right, so now I just created 2 bonds. The valence electrons equal 8 in each bond. Elements can share electrons with more than 1 element, okay? So I have 2 compounds, calcium and oxygen, calcium and oxygen. So let's analyze what we just made. First thing I want to look at is how many total elements do I have, okay? So calcium and oxygen, that's all I see. So elements, I'm going to represent with an E. Elements, I have calcium and oxygen. So that's 2 total. 2 total. Okay? Now how many calciums do I have? I have 1, 2. So there's 2 calciums. What I just counted are atoms, okay? So these are our elements, and these are our atoms. And I have 1, 2 atoms of oxygen. Okay, so I have 2 elements. Okay, when we write this, we're going to write it one at a time. So this is 1 molecule, this is another. You see how these 2 are not connected, they're separate. Okay, so they're 2 separate things. Okay, so Ca, and I have O, and I have 1, 2. Okay, sodium. Okay, so I have 1 atom of sodium. This is 1 atom of sodium. 1 element, 1 atom. Now sodium likes to bond with chlorine. Okay, you see how their valence electrons, 1 plus 7 equals 8. So if we analyze this, how many elements do I have? I have sodium and I have chlorine. I have 1, I have 2. sodium, chlorine, 2 total elements. Okay? Now, how many atoms of each element do I have? How many pieces are there? How many pieces of sodium do you see? I only see 1. So I have 1 atom. How many pieces of chlorine do you see? I only see 1. Okay? So I have 2 total elements and 2 total atoms. Okay? And we represent this compound NaCl. Okay? So we have carbon. Look at this big piece of carbon. Carbon has 4 valence electrons. So it can bond. We have oxygen and chlorine to choose from. But I only have 2 pieces of chlorine, and they each have 7. So 7, so these 2 together, valence electrons, 7 and 7 is 14, plus 4 is 18. That's not enough. Look, it doesn't fit. That's not the right puzzle piece. Okay? Oxygen fits pretty perfect. And when you look at it, carbon will give 2 valence electrons here, and it'll give the other 2 here, making 8 for each. So when carbon shares all of its electrons with oxygen, it creates a full valence here with these 2, and it creates a full valence here. Okay? 6 and 2, 6 and 2. So we divide up carbon's valence electrons. Now, how many elements do you see in this picture? We have carbon, I know you can't see that part. I'm going to have to move it up a little bit. We have carbon and we have oxygen. Okay? So for our elements, we have carbon and oxygen. So that gives us 2 total. Now for atoms, how many atoms of carbon are there? We got 1 piece of carbon. This is just the 1 piece. Okay, 1 piece. So we have 1 atom of carbon. But I have 2 pieces of oxygen. 2 pieces of oxygen. So I have 2 atoms of oxygen. Okay? So even though I only have 2 elements, carbon and oxygen, there's 2 letters, C and O. I have 1 piece of carbon, 1 puzzle piece, and 2 pieces of oxygen. So I have 2 total elements, and I have 2 total elements, and I have 3 total atoms. Okay? So I'm going to write that down on my paper. I had 1 puzzle piece of carbon, but I had 2 puzzle pieces of oxygen. Okay? So the elements, you count the capital letters. The atoms, you count the number of pieces. Okay? So I have 1 puzzle piece of carbon, 2 puzzle pieces of oxygen. So that gives us 2 elements total, but 3 atoms. And this element was CO2, carbon dioxide. Okay? All right, so let's do another. I have 2 giant pieces of aluminum. Okay? 2 puzzle pieces of aluminum. And then I have 2 pieces of oxygen left, and I have 2 pieces of chlorine left. So when we put these pieces together, okay, they all fit. So I have 2 molecules, okay, 2 sets of compounds. So the first thing I want to do is I want to count my elements. Elements I'll represent with an E. I have aluminum. I have aluminum. Al. I have chlorine. Cl. And I have oxygen. Capital O. So when I count the elements, all I'm doing is counting how many capital letters they are. Al, Cl, O. A, C, O. Those are the capital letters, okay? So I have 3 total elements. Now I want to count how many pieces of each element I have. And those pieces represent atoms, okay? So of aluminum, I have 2 pieces. I have 2 big old green pieces of aluminum. Of chlorine, I have 2 big old pieces, 2 pieces of chlorine. And I have 2 pieces of oxygen. So I have 3 total elements, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 total atoms. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 puzzle pieces. Okay? Your atoms are your building blocks. They are your puzzle pieces to everything that you see around you. Okay? Everything you see around you. So, we have 2 compounds that have aluminum, chlorine, and oxygen. And in those compounds, they're made up of 6 pieces. We have 2 pieces of aluminum, 2 pieces of chlorine, and 2 pieces of oxygen. Okay? So we're going to write this. We have Al, then Cl, and O, but I have 2 of these. Okay? And we're going to practice this a whole lot. So I need to record this on my paper. Okay, so I'm just going to copy this exact table down. Number 4. The elements I had were aluminum, chlorine, and oxygen. And I had 2 puzzle pieces of aluminum, 2 puzzle pieces of chlorine, and I had 2 puzzle pieces of oxygen. And those puzzle pieces represent our atoms. So I'm going to take this moment to pause for questions. Okay, so the question was, how did the last one equal 8 valence electrons? So let me just show you with one version. So aluminum has 3 valence electrons. It gives 1 to chlorine, and it gives 2 to oxygen. So it has 3 to distribute. It doesn't have to distribute all 3 to one other element. It can distribute them however they want when they're making these bonds. So when we mix these 3 elements together and we apply some heat, that's how these bonds are formed. And aluminum is going to, or oxygen is going to take 2 of aluminum's valence electrons, and chlorine is going to take 1. Okay? So 1 plus 7 and then 2 plus 6.